Hello! Today we're making a loose-fitting jumpsuit with a belt fastening, perfect for autumn with a t-shirt or light jumper underneath. To start, we need to cut our pattern pieces out. Be careful to ensure you place all pattern pieces in the correct alignment, placing any edges on the fold as required, lining up the grain line and paying attention to how many of each piece you need. Also, remember to snip into any notches and use tailor's chalk to mark the end of the dart in your back trousers. My bodice fabric is patterned, so I'm lining it up so that my pattern is symmetrical. In this pattern, the back and front bodice pieces are very similar, so it's a good idea to mark a B and an F on the wrong side in tailor's chalk in case you get them mixed up. Now we can start sewing. We'll start by binding the top edge of our front bodice. To do this, unfold your binding and align it with the raw edge of your fabric on the wrong side. Sew down using the crease that is closest to the outer edge of your fabric as a guide. Don't worry about the raw edges at each end, you'll be trapping these into your armhole binding to provide a neat finish. Lap your binding over to the front side of the fabric and sew it closed, as close to the edge of the binding as possible. Now repeat this process to bind the back bodice top edge. Now you'll stay stitch the armholes. This means sewing a row of stitching very close to the raw edge in order to stop the fabric from stretching. Once you've done this, you can sew your side seams, with right sides together and a 1 cm seam allowance. Press these seams open. Now, find your armhole binding. Join the ends of each piece of binding together by sewing them close to form a loop. You should be left with 2 circular pieces of binding. Match up the seam you just made in your binding with the side seam of your bodice. Pin these together on the inside edge of your armhole and then pin the binding to your armhole, stretching slightly to fit. There should be a part of the binding left loose in between your armhole. This will become your shoulder strap. Now sew your binding along the inside edge of your armhole, again using the crease that is closest to the outer edge of your fabric as a guide. I sewed my binding on starting at the back so that my back stitch won't be visible on the front of the garment. After you've sewn the inside edge, you can lap your binding over and sew it closed. Once you've sewn the binding to the armhole front, keep going and sew the binding closed on itself to make your shoulder strap. Repeat this whole process for the other armhole. You've finished the bodice for now. You can press it and leave it to one side. Now we'll move on to our trousers. First, sew the pleats in the front waist of the trousers, making sure to fold the fabric over to the appropriate side. There are arrows on your pattern to show you which way to fold. Pin and baste the pleats flush to your waist seam, then give them a press. Now take your back trouser pieces and sew the darts. Sewing from the wrong side of the fabric, start from the waistband and sew downwards, sewing a few stitches parallel to your fabric edge at the end. This will help soften the end of the dart and make sure it doesn't look pointy. Press these nice and flat. Now we'll sew our pockets in. Match the bottom edge of your pockets to the notches in the trouser legs, being careful to put right sides together. Sew these on using a 0.75 cm seam allowance and press this seam nice and flat. Now, take one front and one back leg and pin these right sides together, making sure you're pinning a correct pair, i.e. both left legs. Sew these together, starting from the top of the pocket bag and using a 1 cm seam allowance. Once you get to the end of the pocket bag where it meets your trouser leg, pivot, keeping the needle in the fabric as you do this. Now, continue down the leg until you reach the ankle. Do the same process for the other leg. Now pin and sew your inside leg seams, matching notches and making sure you've pinned right sides together. Now we'll sew our crotch seam. Leave one leg inside out and turn the other the right way round. Fit this leg inside the inside out leg and pin along the crotch seam with right sides together, matching your seams at centre front and centre back. This sounds tricky, but it's actually really simple. You might need to watch closely to see how I'm doing it. Next, we'll sew our trousers to the bodice. Turn your bodice inside out and match up all the seams with the corresponding seams on the trouser waistband. Because you've turned it inside out, it should be easier to make sure you're pinning right sides together. Sew the bodice and trousers together all the way around the waist seam. Now we'll make our belt. It's pretty straightforward and we'll start by making some belt loops. To make your belt loops, fold your fabric in half, right sides together and press with the iron. Now fold each outer edge in towards the crease you just ironed and press flat. Now fold the fabric in on itself again and press closed. Top stitch this down as close to the edge as possible. You can chop this in half and now press both edges under by about 1/2 centimetre. To attach our belt loops, place one belt loop face down on your jumpsuit at the side seam. Position the crease just below the waistband and just behind your pocket bag to avoid bulk. Now sew down along the crease. Go back and forth a few times for stability. Belt loops can be a bit tough to sew over as they're very thick, so you may need to turn the wheel by hand a little to avoid breaking your needle, or alternatively you can sew them on completely by hand. Now flip the belt loop up and sew over that bottom edge a few times to secure it. Next, sew the other end of the belt loop to the bodice wherever it lands comfortably. You don't want to overstretch the belt loop by placing this piece too high up the seam, as it will pull your fabric and make it look awkward. Lastly, we need to make our belt. Sew the short edges of both belt pieces together at the centre back seam, making sure to match right sides together. Press the seam open and then fold right sides together along the long edge before sewing right the way along with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. Your belt is now inside out. To turn it the right way around, get a large safety pin and attach it to one end of your belt. Now feed the safety pin through the middle of your belt until it reaches the other end. You should now be able to easily pull the rest of the belt through behind it. Give it a good press right along the seam line. Push the ends of the belt inside, forming a neat point, and iron this down before invisibly hand sewing it closed. And that's it, you're done. I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Please tag us in any pictures on social media, we'd love to see what you've made.